The President of the United States just threatened to burn out the lights of 87 million people. While 50,000 American troops massed for invasion, while aircraft carriers steamed toward the Persian Gulf, while Marines checked their weapons and studied their maps, Donald Trump took to social media and promised to destroy Iran's electricity, its oil exports, and the island that keeps its economy alive. This was not diplomatic language. This was not strategic ambiguity. This was a threat of total war delivered in the casual tone of a man discussing real estate deals against a nation that has already demonstrated its willingness to kill and die rather than surrender. And while this threat was being posted, while the world was absorbing its implications, confirmation came from Tehran that changed the military balance entirely. The commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy, the man who had been threatening to burn American soldiers, was dead. Killed by an American strike, or by internal explosion, or by the mysterious circumstances that attend warfare in the shadows. His death removes a key Iranian leader at the moment of maximum tension. His death demonstrates that American targeting has penetrated Iranian command structures. His death guarantees that Iran will retaliate, not just with words, but with the missiles and proxies that have been prepared for exactly this moment. Welcome to the Global Eye. Today we expose the countdown to the American invasion, the Iranian commander who will not live to see it, and the global catastrophe that threatens to erupt when 50,000 Americans confront 87 million Iranians in the largest Middle East war since 1945. The message appeared on Truth Social at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time on March 30th, 2026. It was not a formal statement from the White House press office. It was not a diplomatic communication delivered through established channels. It was a social media post composed in the distinctive syntax that has characterized Trump's public communication for a decade, threatening the destruction of a nation's essential infrastructure in terms that brooked no negotiation and offered no alternative. If they don't make a deal, the post read, we will have to do something. We'll burn out their electricity. We'll knock out their oil. We'll hit Karg Island so hard they'll have nothing left to export. The specificity of the threat was unprecedented in American presidential communication. Previous administrations had spoken of all options on the table, or severe consequences, or unacceptable behavior. They had maintained ambiguity about exactly what would trigger exactly what response, preserving flexibility for negotiation and de-escalation. Trump eliminated that ambiguity. He named the targets. He described the effects. He promised destruction that would reduce Iran to economic paralysis and humanitarian catastrophe. Karg Island is Iran's economic jugular. The island terminal handles 90% of Iranian oil exports. The revenue that keeps the government functioning, the military paid, the population fed. It is not a military base. It is infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, protected under international humanitarian law from deliberate attack. Trump's threat to hit it so hard they'll have nothing left to export is a threat to destroy civilian infrastructure essential to national survival, an act that would constitute a war crime under the Geneva Conventions if carried out deliberately. The threat to burn out their electricity is equally specific and equally devastating. Iran's power grid serves 87 million people. Its destruction would mean hospitals without life support, water systems without pumps, refrigeration without cooling, communication without transmission. The humanitarian consequences would be catastrophic, measured in deaths from heat and cold and medical failure and social collapse. The threat was not a military strategy. It was a promise of collective punishment, of suffering imposed on an entire population for the decisions of its government. The threat to knock out their oil extends beyond Karg Island to the production facilities, the pipelines, the refineries that constitute Iran's energy sector. This is not a limited strike against military capabilities. This is a comprehensive assault on national infrastructure that would reduce Iran to pre-industrial conditions. That would create a humanitarian crisis of regional proportions that would send energy prices to levels that would trigger global recession. Trump's post concluded with the deadline that has become characteristic of his diplomatic style. If they don't make a deal. No specification of what deal, what terms, what timeline. The ambiguity of the condition makes compliance impossible, makes negotiation meaningless, makes the threat appear designed for implementation rather than deterrence. The Iranians reading this post understood that they were being given an ultimatum they could not meet, that war was coming regardless of their response, that their only option was preparation for survival rather than concession. While Trump was posting threats, the military machine was preparing to implement them. The 50,000 American troops in the Middle East as of March 30th, 2026, represent the largest American ground force in the region since the Iraq invasion of 2003. They are distributed across bases in Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, with the concentration in Qatar that would serve as the launching point for invasion. The USS Tripoli, with its 3,500 Marines, is the spearhead. It has been joined by the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, with its 5,000 sailors and 90 aircraft. The USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group is steaming from the Pacific, expected to arrive within days, doubling American naval air power in the region. Amphibious ready groups with additional Marine expeditionary units are positioned in the Arabian Sea. Air Force fighter wings have been reinforced with squadrons from Europe and the United States. Special operations forces, whose numbers and locations are classified but whose presence is confirmed by preparation of forward operating bases, are ready for the deep penetration missions that would accompany any invasion. The logistics of this deployment are staggering. Pre-positioned equipment stocks maintained in Qatar and Kuwait since the 1990s have been activated and are being distributed to forward units. Ammunition ships are unloading at ports that have been secured against Iranian retaliation. Hospital ships are positioned to receive casualties that planners estimate in thousands for the first weeks of operations. Fuel supplies, food stocks, spare parts, and the 1,000 items that sustain military operations are flowing into the region in quantities that suggest preparation for sustained combat rather than limited strikes. The 50,000 troops are not sufficient for occupation of Iran. That would require forces that the United States no longer possesses, commitments that would dwarf the Iraq and Afghanistan surges combined. But they are sufficient for the specific operations that Pentagon planners have developed. The destruction of Iranian nuclear facilities that airstrikes cannot reliably eliminate. The capture of strategic points that would enable sustained air operations. The decapitation of Iranian command and control that might produce regime collapse or at least regime paralysis. The troops are ready. The equipment is ready. The plans are ready. What is not ready is the political decision to execute them, the international support that would legitimize them, the post-conflict strategy that would follow them. The military is preparing for war while the diplomats are still talking, while the ultimatums are still being delivered, while the possibility of negotiated resolution, however remote, has not been finally extinguished. The confirmation of Alireza Tangsiri's death arrived from Tehran at 6:23 p.m. local time, 12 hours after Trump's threat and 3 hours after the American president's social media post. Tangsiri was the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Navy, the naval force that operates in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, the force that has been threatening to close the strait, to attack American shipping, to burn American soldiers in the region. His death had been reported previously, claimed by American sources as the result of an airstrike, denied by Iranian sources as propaganda. The confirmation on March 30th, after days of uncertainty, demonstrated that American intelligence and targeting had penetrated to the highest levels of Iranian military command. It demonstrated that the Revolutionary Guard, for all its ideological commitment and operational experience, could not protect its own leaders. And it demonstrated that the war that had been conducted through proxies and intermediaries was now directly engaging the command structures of both nations. Tangsiri was not a marginal figure. He had been appointed commander in 2018, after the American withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, charged with developing the naval capabilities that would enable Iran to resist American pressure. He had overseen the acquisition of fast attack craft that could swarm American naval vessels, the deployment of coastal missiles that could threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, the development of unmanned underwater vehicles that could mine approaches to American bases. He had been the public face of Iranian naval threats, appearing in videos that showed Revolutionary Guard speedboats circling American warships that promised hell for American forces if they attacked Iran. His death removes a key operational commander at the moment of maximum tension. It disrupts Iranian naval command and control, creating uncertainty about who will make decisions, who will execute orders, who will control the forces that have been prepared for confrontation. It demonstrates to the Iranian military that American targeting is precise and effective, that leadership positions offer no protection, that the costs of confrontation will include personal survival. And it guarantees Iranian retaliation, not just because of organizational protocol, but because of the cultural and political necessity of demonstrating that killing Iranian commanders produces consequences that exceed the benefits. The circumstances of Tangsiri's death remain unclear. American sources claim a precision airstrike based on intelligence that tracked his movements. Iranian sources suggest internal explosion, possibly sabotage, possibly accident, possibly American special operations that penetrated Iranian territory. The ambiguity serves American interests by suggesting capabilities that may not exist, by creating paranoia about infiltration and betrayal, by forcing Iranian security services to devote resources to internal investigation rather than external operations. The clarity of the result, the confirmed death, serves Iranian interests by providing justification for retaliation, by mobilizing public anger, by demonstrating that the conflict is existential and requires total commitment. Iran's response to Trump's threat and Tangsiri's death came within hours, delivered through multiple channels that demonstrated the range of Iranian capabilities and the seriousness of Iranian intent. The Revolutionary Guard issued a statement promising to burn the Americans in retaliation, using the same language of fire that Trump had employed, accepting the rhetorical framework of total war that the American president had established. The Iranian Foreign Ministry summoned the Swiss ambassador, who represents American interests in Tehran, to deliver a formal protest that was simultaneously diplomatic formality and warning of consequences. Iranian military forces were observed moving to positions of readiness, missile launchers emerging from concealed positions, naval vessels leaving port for dispersal at sea, aircraft being moved from vulnerable bases to hardened shelters. The specific threat that accompanied these movements was unprecedented in its scope. Iranian sources indicated that retaliation would not be limited to American military targets in the region, that it would extend to American allies who host American bases, that it would include cyber attacks against American infrastructure, that it would involve the activation of proxies from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq, who have been prepared for exactly this moment. The threat was not a promise of proportional response. It was a promise of escalation, of expanding the conflict beyond the region, of making the costs of American attack exceed any conceivable benefit. The most alarming element of the Iranian response was the indication that nuclear facilities, which had been attacked by American and Israeli strikes over the preceding weeks, might be open to international inspectors as a demonstration that they had been destroyed, or might be accelerated to produce weapons-grade material, as a demonstration that they could not be destroyed without producing the very capability that the attacks were intended to prevent. The ambiguity was deliberate, designed to create uncertainty about Iranian capabilities and intentions, to force American planners to consider the possibility that military action would produce the nuclear-armed Iran that it was intended to prevent. Iranian popular response to the crisis has been mobilized by state media that has portrayed the conflict as defensive, as resistance to American aggression, as the latest episode in a history of American interference that dates to the 1953 coup and the 1979 revolution, and the decades of sanctions and hostility that have followed. The death of Tangsiri has been transformed into martyrdom, into inspiration for resistance, into proof that Iran is the victim of American attack rather than the aggressor that American rhetoric portrays. The mobilization is genuine, rooted in nationalism that transcends the Islamic Republic's ideological commitments, and it represents a resource that Iranian leaders can draw upon for sustained conflict in ways that American planners may not fully appreciate. The confrontation between American and Iranian forces is not occurring in a vacuum. It is occurring in a region that is already fractured by war, that is already mobilized for conflict, that is already experiencing the humanitarian and economic consequences of sustained violence. The 50,000 American troops are not the only foreign forces in the region. There are Iranian proxies in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, who have been armed and trained for exactly this moment. There are Israeli forces on alert for Iranian retaliation that might extend to Israeli territory. There are Saudi and Emirati forces preparing to defend their territories against Iranian missile attack. There are Turkish forces positioned along the Iraqi border, ready to exploit any collapse of Iranian control in the region. The regional tinderbox is prepared for ignition, and the American-Iranian confrontation is the spark that could ignite it. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil shipments pass, is the most vulnerable point. Iranian naval forces, even without Tangsiri's command, have the capability to mine the strait, to attack shipping with missiles and fast boats, to create a crisis in global energy markets that would trigger recession and political instability in importing nations. American naval forces have the capability to keep the strait open, but only at the cost of sustained combat that would produce casualties and damage, and the risk of escalation to wider war. The economic consequences of strait closure, even temporary, would be measured in trillions of dollars and would affect every nation on Earth. The Gulf states, which host the majority of American forces, are caught between their alliance with the United States and their vulnerability to Iranian retaliation. Qatar, which hosts the largest American base at Al Udeid, has been attempting to maintain neutrality, to serve as a channel for negotiation, to preserve the relationships with all parties that have been the foundation of Qatari foreign policy. That neutrality is no longer possible. The presence of 50,000 American troops, the threat of American invasion, the certainty of Iranian retaliation forces choices that Qatar has spent a generation avoiding. The other Gulf states face similar dilemmas, with less capacity for independent action and greater dependence on American protection that may not be sufficient to the threat they face. The regional economy, which depends on oil exports and on the stability that enables commerce, is already experiencing the consequences of confrontation. Shipping insurance rates have reached levels that make commercial voyages unprofitable. Investment has fled to safer markets. Tourism, which has been the foundation of diversification strategies, has collapsed. The economic damage of the confrontation, even without the war that confrontation threatens, is measured in hundreds of billions of dollars and will affect regional development for a generation. The confrontation between the United States and Iran is not a regional dispute that can be contained by geography. It is a global crisis that affects energy markets, financial systems, and the international order that has maintained relative peace since 1945. The threat to close the Strait of Hormuz is a threat to the global economy. The threat to attack American allies is a threat to the alliance system that has maintained American power. The threat to activate proxies across the Middle East is a threat to the stability of a region that supplies the energy and hosts the choke points that the global economy requires. China, which imports the majority of its oil from the Persian Gulf, is watching the confrontation with alarm that masks strategic opportunity. Chinese leaders understand that American entanglement in the Middle East reduces American capacity to respond to Chinese actions in the Pacific. They understand that energy price spikes caused by the Middle East conflict will damage Western economies more than the Chinese economy, which has been preparing for energy transition and strategic reserve accumulation. And they understand that American-Iranian confrontation creates opportunities for Chinese diplomatic and economic influence in a region where American power has been the dominant factor for 3 generations. China will not directly intervene in the confrontation, but it will exploit its consequences in ways that advance Chinese interests at American expense. Russia, which has been supplying Iran with technology and supporting Iranian international position, is watching with satisfaction that masks concern about escalation. Russian leaders understand that American entanglement with Iran reduces American support for Ukraine, creating opportunities for Russian military success that have been elusive since the full-scale invasion began. They understand that energy price spikes caused by the Middle East conflict will benefit Russian oil and gas exports, providing revenue that sanctions have been designed to deny. But they also understand that a regional war that expands beyond control could affect Russian interests in Syria, in Central Asia, and in the Caucasus, creating instability that could threaten Russian borders and Russian influence. Russia will support Iran up to the point where Iranian success threatens Russian interests and will adjust its support accordingly. Europe, which depends on Middle East energy and on American security guarantees, is watching with the paralysis of allies who have no independent capacity to influence events. European leaders have condemned Iranian threats and supported American positions, but they have no military capability to contribute to American operations and no diplomatic influence to contribute to de-escalation. The European response to the crisis is limited to statements of solidarity that demonstrate alliance cohesion without affecting the military balance, and to preparation for the energy and refugee crises that will follow if war breaks out. European power, which once shaped Middle East outcomes, has been reduced to reaction to American decisions that Europeans cannot influence. The hours that remain before the deadline that Trump has implicitly established are being measured in preparations for war that cannot be reversed. The 50,000 American troops are checking their equipment, studying their maps, writing letters home that may be their last communication with families who do not yet understand what is coming. The Iranian forces are moving to positions of readiness, preparing missiles for launch, dispersing assets to survive American attack, planning retaliation that will make American victory Pyrrhic, even if achieved. The regional populations are stockpiling food and water, preparing shelters, attempting to depart for safety that does not exist in a war zone that will encompass the entire region. The diplomacy that might prevent war is continuing in shadows, through channels that are not public and may not be effective. The Swiss ambassador in Tehran, the Qatari foreign minister, the Omani Sultan's representatives are attempting to find formulas that would allow both sides to claim something other than total defeat, that would provide face-saving exits from confrontation that neither side can publicly abandon. The formulas are familiar from decades of Middle East negotiation: temporary suspensions of activity, mutual declarations of non-aggression, international monitoring of disputed activities, commitments to future negotiation that postpone immediate conflict. None of these formulas address the fundamental issues that have produced confrontation: Iranian nuclear ambition, American determination to prevent it, the regional power struggle that has made this issue the symbol of larger contests. The likelihood that diplomacy will succeed is diminishing with each hour that passes, with each threat that is delivered, with each preparation for war that makes the cost of peace appear greater than the cost of conflict. The logic of escalation is driving both sides toward confrontation that neither side wants, but neither side can prevent without accepting defeat that would be politically and strategically catastrophic. The 50,000 American troops are not a negotiating position. They are an invasion force. The Iranian threats are not bargaining tactics. They are promises of retaliation that will be fulfilled because national honor and regime survival require it. This is not a distant crisis. This is not a regional dispute that can be ignored by populations far from the Persian Gulf. The 50,000 American troops who are preparing for invasion include your neighbors, your relatives, your fellow citizens who have been sent to a war zone by decisions that they did not make and cannot influence. The energy prices that will spike if the Strait of Hormuz closes will affect your cost of living, your economic security, and your political stability. The global order that is being tested by this confrontation is the order that has maintained relative peace for 3 generations, and its collapse will affect your security in ways that you cannot yet imagine. You need to understand what is happening. You need to see the connections between Trump's threat and Tangsiri's death, between the 50,000 troops and the 87 million Iranians, between the regional confrontation and the global consequences that will follow. You need to demand that your governments, whatever nation you live in, recognize the stakes and act to prevent the catastrophe that is being prepared in the hours that remain before the deadline expires. Subscribe to the Global Eye. Enable notifications. Share this video with anyone who thinks that what happens in the Persian Gulf does not affect their daily life. The countdown is real. The troops are ready. The commander is dead. And the war that could reshape the world for a generation is closer than it has ever been. We are watching it happen. We are documenting it. And we will not be silent. 3 questions for those who watched until the end. Answer in the comments. I will read and respond to the most thoughtful analysis. Question A. Should America proceed with invasion after threatening Iran's electricity and oil, or was Trump's post-reckless escalation that closes diplomatic options? Question B. Does killing Tangsiri strengthen the American position by disrupting Iranian command, or guarantee Iranian retaliation that makes war inevitable? Question C. If Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation, should America accept global economic damage or escalate to a wider war that could go nuclear? Drop your answers below. This is the Global Eye. We see what others miss.